Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by Trackpads.com. Each week, we take one pivotal moment from United States military history and follow it from the first warning signs to the final outcome. Today, we go to central Tunisia in the Second World War for the story of the Battle of Kasserine Pass. For listeners who want the fuller version, the print edition includes a longer account with fact sheets and photos, available on LinkedIn or by email. Cold wind knifed through the cleft in the Tunisian hills as first light bled into Kasserine Pass. American engineers had scraped shallow foxholes into rocky soil, strung wire and mines across ground they barely understood, and watched tank destroyers and half-tracks huddled under scrub and boulders. The slopes seemed to promise a natural fortress, but that was an illusion. Men checked weapons, pulled jackets tight, and stared into the valley where German armor was beginning to move. The soldiers of the United States Second Corps were new to this kind of war. Many had reached North Africa only weeks earlier, trained on stateside ranges and classroom maps rather than in combat against seasoned panzer crews. Now a distant line of dust crept along the valley floor, carrying the sound of engines they were still learning to fear. Shapes moved in the haze, hard to identify at first, until the growl of armor filled the pass and made the threat unmistakable. The first shells came as dull flashes on the ridgeline, followed by explosions that tore through rocky ground, trucks, ammunition dumps, and hurriedly placed gun pits. German artillery walked fire along American positions with practiced precision. Radio nets filled with overlapping voices, reports, questions, and orders that collided on crowded channels. Some units called tanks in front of them, others reported fire from directions that made little sense on a map. Confusion spread almost as quickly as the dust. For officers trying to make decisions, the battle arrived as fragments rather than as a clean picture. A roadblock was holding, then gone. A gun line was in action, then silent. A reserve was ordered forward, then delayed by traffic, shellfire, or uncertainty over who actually controlled it. Beyond the smoke, German panzer crews were probing for weak spots. They used draws, folds, gullies, and side valleys the defenders had not properly covered. To the Americans, the terrain was still unfamiliar and deceptive. To veteran German commanders, it offered ways to close distance, bypass strong points, and appear where the line was thinnest. The speed and violence of the attack felt nothing like a measured test of training. It felt like the battlefield was moving faster than orders could travel. Units that had never fought together under fire tried to hold while nearby positions bent or broke. Some stayed until flanking fire made their ground impossible. Others pulled back too quickly and opened gaps. The narrow pass that had seemed defensible began to feel like a trap, with enemy armor forcing forward and infantry following behind. By the end of that day, it was clear that Kasserine was more than one bad morning on a lonely road. It was an examination of a young army under live fire, and the exam was going badly. To see why Kasserine mattered, step back to the winter of 1943. The Allied landings in North Africa had brought American troops into the European war in large numbers for the first time. They linked with British forces that had fought across Egypt and Libya, and together they aimed to squeeze German and Italian forces in Tunisia from east and west. Geography turned that simple idea into a hard fight for passes, roads, towns, and ridges that controlled movement through the mountains. Kasserine Pass was one of those gateways. It cut through the eastern dorsal of the Atlas Mountains and offered a route toward Allied rear areas, fuel dumps, supply depots, and road networks feeding the front. If German armor broke Second Corps and punched through, it could scatter green American divisions, damage logistics, and delay the Allied campaign. For the Axis, success promised time and a chance to bloody the Americans so badly that Allied leaders might hesitate before the next major move. For the Americans, the stakes went deeper than the pass itself. Second Corps was commanded and organized by men who had not yet proven their ideas in a modern campaign. British partners, hardened by years against the Afrika Korps, were watching closely. A serious defeat risked more than casualties. It threatened confidence in American leadership, doctrine, and tactical judgment. Kasserine became a test of whether a rapidly expanding army could withstand a skilled opponent and then adapt fast enough to stay in the war. The chaos did not come from nowhere. After the November landings, American units pushed inland from the Algerian coast and took over long stretches of front across central Tunisia. Under Lieutenant General Lloyd Fredendall, Second Corps held a wide area with divisions scattered in separate pockets, linked by bad roads and long radio circuits. Units dug in around Sidi Bouzid, Gafsa, and the approaches to the eastern dorsal, often choosing positions quickly and without the instincts that come from fighting over the ground. Across the line, German and Italian forces were also under pressure, but they were led and manned by veterans. Officers such as Hans-Jürgen von Arnim and Erwin Rommel understood that the Americans were still finding their feet. Rather than wait for the Allied squeeze to tighten, Axis commanders chose sharp blows against the weaker western flank. They planned to use panzer and panzer grenadier units to smash isolated positions, seize key passes, and roll toward the Allied rear before the defense hardened. The first heavy shocks came at Sidi Bouzid and Sbeitla. German attacks combined tanks, artillery, and air support with a precision the green American units had not yet faced. American armor was sometimes posted on exposed high ground that looked commanding on a map but offered little real protection from well-placed German guns. Communications lagged, orders arrived late or contradicted earlier instructions, and counterattacks went in piecemeal. When those forward positions broke, the retreat rippled back toward Kasserine. Behind the units scrambling to reform in the hills, senior Allied commanders were also struggling with coalition friction. British officers questioned American doctrine and staff work. Some American leaders bristled at what they saw as condescension. These tensions affected decisions about reserves, counterattacks, and air support. By the time German columns turned toward Kasserine, the pass was no longer just a tactical choke point. It was the place where the seams in a new coalition and a new army would be tested together. When German spearheads entered the approaches in mid-February 1943, they found defenders still shaken from earlier blows. Many American positions were improvised, sighted under pressure, and manned by troops who had never endured a sustained attack on such complex terrain. In theory, the narrow pass could be dominated by well-placed guns. In practice, German reconnaissance found weak sectors, and panzer units used the folds of the hills to avoid silhouetting themselves while they pushed forward. American gunners and tank destroyer crews fought hard, knocking out vehicles that exposed themselves too boldly, but ammunition resupply was uncertain and fire control often broke down. Rifle companies held in some places until German infantry and tanks worked around their sides. As the fight spread into neighboring passes and valleys, Axis forces tried to exploit every opening and roll up the defensive belt from the rear. Columns moved toward vital junctions leading to Thala and Tebessa, aiming at the supply routes and headquarters that kept Second Corps functioning. On the ground, the battle became a confused series of small fights. Platoons, scattered by shelling, reformed behind rocks and wadi banks, only to be driven back by another push. Engineers blew culverts and laid mines under fire. Convoys of trucks and artillery pieces moved along narrow roads in darkness, while staff officers tried to send reserves where they were needed without exposing other sectors. Allied aircraft searched for chances to hit the advancing columns, sometimes striking hard and sometimes missing in dust, bad weather, or flak. Air power could help, but it could not instantly repair a broken ground situation. The fight still depended on units finding defensible ground, restoring command links, and buying time one ridge or road junction at a time. That reality made the stand beyond Kasserine important because it showed the difference between a line that was surprised and a line that was starting to recover. The early Axis gains were undeniable. American positions were overrun, guns abandoned, and prisoners taken in numbers that shocked Allied leaders. Yet friction appeared on the German side as well. Rommel and other commanders disagreed over objectives and timing, while fuel, ammunition, and traffic struggled through narrow mountain roads. Every wreck or crater threatened to block a route. Each hour lost to confusion bought time for Allied commanders to assemble stronger blocking positions beyond the pass. That time mattered most near Thala and Tebessa. As German columns pushed toward those routes, they finally met a more solid screen of British and American units. The ground narrowed again into ridges and spurs overlooking key junctions, and Allied commanders massed artillery in ways the Green troops at Kasserine had not yet learned to do. Instead of isolated guns firing independently, batteries were tied into coordinated missions that could bring heavy fire onto road bends, wadi mouths, and forming up areas. When German armor tried to force those positions, it ran into sudden barrages that smashed roads and made exposed halts dangerous. Infantry working around the flanks found better-sited defenses on reverse slopes with overlapping machine gun fire. The defenders still took losses, but withdrawals were more measured and tied to planned fallback lines. Every hour the line held near Thala and on the approaches to Tebessa drained momentum from the Axis offensive and narrowed the chance of a clean breakthrough. Behind the firing batteries, a quieter transformation was already taking shape. American leaders saw that armor could not be left on exposed ridges like stationary forts. Tanks had to work with infantry and artillery as a mobile weapon. They saw that headquarters buried too far to the rear could not feel the fight or react quickly when things went wrong. Even before the battle ended, messages were moving about changes that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. When Axis forces finally pulled back from their deepest gains, the map still told a sobering story. American units had been shoved from early positions, equipment littered retreat routes, and casualty lists cut into formations newly arrived overseas. German and Italian forces could claim a tactical victory. They had inflicted losses, taken prisoners, and exposed serious weaknesses. But they had not achieved their deeper aims. Thala and Tebessa remained in Allied hands. The rear area supply network still functioned, and Second Corps was bloodied, not broken. What followed mattered even more. Fredendall was relieved, and commanders such as George Patton and later Omar Bradley took key roles in reshaping Second Corps. Headquarters moved closer to the front. Training in theater shifted toward combined arms, with tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support drilled to operate as a team rather than as separate branches. The Army did not become seasoned overnight, but it began changing in visible ways because the cost of not changing had been paid in the passes. Just as important, those changes had to reach below headquarters. Platoon leaders, tank commanders, artillery observers, and engineers all had to absorb the same lesson. Survival depended on coordination, not isolated courage. Lessons that might once have sounded like staff college theory now had burned vehicles and missing men attached to them. Better reconnaissance, clearer orders, closer headquarters, and stronger artillery coordination became urgent because soldiers had just seen what happened when those things failed. Kasserine became a crucible. American units that later fought in Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy carried forward lessons about overextended lines, insecure flanks, disciplined withdrawals, massed artillery, and better defensive belts. British partners also adjusted their views as they saw the Americans absorb a blow, correct mistakes, and continue the campaign. Over time, coalition command relationships tightened,
helping build the partnership that would be seen later in Normandy and beyond.
For soldiers and junior leaders who survived, Kasserine often became a personal measuring stick. They learned what to look for in terrain, how to recognize an enemy probing for weak spots, and when to push back or dig in. For later officers and historians, the pass became a case study in adaptation. Its rocks and scrub are quiet now, but the lesson remains clear. Early defeats, if faced honestly, can become the backbone of later success.
As we close this story, remember that Kasserine was not important because the Americans performed perfectly. It matters because they did not. They were hit hard, exposed, and forced to confront the gap between expectation and combat reality. The value of Kasserine lies in that uncomfortable honesty, because the defeat revealed problems clearly enough that they could no longer be explained away as bad luck or temporary confusion. The army that emerged from those hills was still learning, but it was learning fast. Headline Wednesday is developed by Trackpads.com as part of Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine.